So welcome everybody, and it's great to have people on here to hear a little bit about geohazards. And earlier this year, I was at a meeting with, we've got on the line with us today, Jen Holmstadt with WSB, and that she had mentioned that she'd been working with geohazards and clients and had some processes and tools she developed. And then throughout the year, everything we went to, every meeting, every conference, that was a hot topic, and it kind of piqued my interest in something that I've been aware of over the years, working with pipeline programs, but not really dug into a whole lot. So we're gonna have a quick little discussion and then point you to some resources that Jen's developed that are available out on LinkedIn. And I've looked at a handful of them and they're great information. So I'll let Jen introduce herself for a minute, and then we'll have a quick discussion about some things to be aware of and how to work on your programs.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. My name is Jen Homestead. I am a geomorphologist. As you mentioned, I have been working in the industry, working with operators in their geohazards programs for about 10 years now. And so we've helped operators really all over the country, across any type of terrain and any type of hazard. So we're very experienced, both in the planning stage and after you've already got your pipe in the ground, and we're really on the integrity management side. So what else can I tell you about?
Well, I think a couple questions I would have is, I know you talked about kind of some tools and process, and what would be some examples of those, and then also maybe a couple of examples with specific clients without names, obviously, but of what you help clients do and how it helped them.
So what my team does is we really work on the predictive side. We like to use tools that help us predict when an operator is going to have a problem. So we use a suite of GIS-based tools that we've developed that allow us to locate where an operator is going to have a problem before it happens. And so we can do this with any type of hazard, with the exception of earthquakes. There's nobody who's really cracked the egg on predicting when an earthquake.
You can't predict those yet, huh?
Yeah.
You'll have a great business once you do that.
Exactly. Yeah. We can tell you if you're likely to have earthquakes, but we can't tell you if you're going to have one for sure. But let me just give you an example for slopes, because slope failures are a really hot topic in the industry, especially with some of the incidents that we've had lately with pipe incidents related to slope failures. So we have some programs that we developed within GIS where we can look at your system and tell you every place we've ever had a slope failure in the past. And then we use that information to determine what factors influenced and caused that slope failure. So what that means is there's usually a combination of factors that cause slope failures. It's very rarely just one thing. It's not usually just slope angle or slope steepness or the type of material the slope is made out of. It's usually a combination of factors. And so we find what those combination of factors are, and then we use that information to predict where you're likely to have slope failures in the future. And we find all the places along your pipeline where those combination of factors come together, and then we can use that to figure out where you have vulnerable slopes. And that gives us a very high confidence of predictability for where you're going to have slope failures.
And that seems like it's very key to me that, it's one thing to evaluate things after something happens, but that you've developed a process to help them predict and then mitigate the potential effects of that. So
yeah, and we basically use the same process, the same framework for all the hazards that we assess. So slope failures, sinkholes, subsidence, all the different hazards that are laid out in 192 or 195. We can assess for all of those.
Nice. And this taps into all my favorite things. My degree in college is natural resources, and literally one of my favorite classes was geomorphology. I do not do it as a living. I just love looking at all the maps and thought it was cool in GIS. So I'm fascinated by this. Something else I was going to ask you. So you, I assume, have been listening to the PHMSA meetings this week, and I know earlier there was the first topic was geohazards. Was there anything specific that came out of that kind of ties into what you're doing, or you think it'd be good for folks listening to know about?
Well, I think it's definitely the case that PHMSA and NTSB and some of these other agencies are more interested in geohazards and wanting operators to start paying closer attention to them.
Right. Absolutely.
it's been mentioned many times over the last 3 days in many contexts, whether it's just at the beginning of the meetings where they were specifically addressing geohazards, but they've brought it up even today during the, I believe Steve Manny was discussing in the risk modeling portion. And he brought it up in regards to looking at during routing, which I think is really important. I think if operators are constructing, it would be really important to have somebody like us come in and look at it before you put the pipe in.
Before you ever even put it there, right?
Yeah. Even if you can't move the pipe, we could offer suggestions during construction or after construction to help you manage it that could mitigate some of the risks that you might pose. And we do that for operators now, and it seems to work very well for them and helps them mitigate their risk. So
Nice.
that's one thing that I've taken away from it. And I think the other thing is that Linda had mentioned that PHMSA does not believe that operators should be having any slope related failures after this point because of all the information that there is in the industry. And I think that's a really difficult threshold for operators to meet. So I think number one, there's not that many people like me out in the industry helping operators do this. We don't have that many subject matter experts. And number two, Mother Nature is a fickle lady. And I mean, nobody can predict with 100% accuracy. You can get very close and you can get a very good idea of when you're going to have an issue. But so I think that's really tough for operators to meet. I think we can get people close, but that's going to be tough.
Right. I think that's a good point. You know, in all the years I've worked with pipelines, and like I said, geohazard management was always part of operators' programs, but it didn't necessarily have the same priority as it does now. Not that people didn't care, it just wasn't as much of an issue. And you're right. I worked for the Trans-Alaska pipeline where we did have experts on that, but that was kind of a unique situation. But other than that, whereas in the industry with other topics, you can usually, if you named almost any other topic, I could probably list 3 or 4 people I know that do this. And this is one that is a little bit of a one-off. You're right. There's not a lot of people doing it. I think that's why it really stuck in my head when you mentioned that you've been doing this. And Linda, it's interesting you mentioned Linda Doherty with PHMSA, because I was recently at the Pipeline Safety Trust conference and she talked a couple of times about the same thing. And one of the things I think ties in so perfectly with what we're talking about here is how the technology's changed just over the last 10, 15, 20 years with how they, how those hazards can be assessed. And I think what you're offering is just another tool and another piece of technology and knowledge and insight on top of that to marry, kind of subject matter expert information with technology to help operators identify and, more importantly, mitigate those risks. So I recall you have some information out, and I think it seems like the best source is LinkedIn because they're all there and they're easy to find. Can you tell folks a little bit about how they can go find those and what's out there so that they can follow up and then we'll make sure we have contact information for you on here so folks can get a hold of you too. But if you could talk a little bit about what's out on LinkedIn, that'd be helpful, I think.
Sure. Periodically from time to time, I post information on LinkedIn, either under my posts or articles. Sometimes my staff writes it and then I'll repost it. So that's why you want to go to my posts. Basically general information about what certain geohazards are and how they happen and how they impact pipelines. Or we'll post regulatory information or updates about geohazards and the things that operators need to be paying attention to. So you can go to my LinkedIn and you can find that information either under my articles or under my posts.
Nice.
The other thing that I do is I pay attention to what's going on in the industry and I send out information directly to operators if you're on my list of folks I either work with or folks that I know. And so if you're interested in being on that mailing list, you can just reach out to me. I'm happy to add you in.
So good to know.
To the regulatory changes or to things that are happening. I send that information out periodically. So I'm happy to add anybody in who wants to be added to that.
Absolutely. Well, good to know. All right. Well, is there anything else we haven't talked about? I'm trying to think if there's anything on the things we were going to talk about that I missed, but I think we've covered it. But is there anything else you want to add?
Really just, I'm here as a resource. I answer a lot of my friend has a pipeline questions, just like what we're doing here. So I'm always available to answer questions for folks or act as a resource. If you want to have me back on it sometime to get more in depth about specific geohazards, I'm happy to do that too.
I think that would be a great idea. Great idea. Well, thank you. And I think that's a great idea to start digging a little bit deeper on some of those. And so we'll plan that out for future episodes. Thanks, Jen.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.